Members' statements has concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Senator Canavan resigned from Cabinet 43 days ago. Why is the Deputy Prime Minister still sitting on your front?
Members on my right. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. Members on my right are preventing me hearing the question. They'll cease interjecting, including the Leader of the House and the Deputy Prime Minister. The Leader of the Opposition will repeat his question from the beginning.
Senator Canavan resigned from Cabinet 43 days ago. So why is the Deputy Prime Minister still sitting on your front bench? What is he still doing here?
Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The honourable member's question has a distinctly familiar ring to it, and I refer him to my earlier answers.
Members on my right. The Deputy Prime Minister. The member for Ford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on recent discussions with world leaders on North Korea and the risks that this is posing to the region?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. He, like all members of the government, are focused on the issues that are of most concern to Australians: energy prices, economic growth, jobs, but above all, national security. And there is no greater risk to the security of our region than the threat posed by North Korea today. Now, I can inform the House that I discussed the North Korean threat and other security issues with President Trump this morning. The risk of war on the Korean Peninsula is, as we noted, greater than it has been for 60 years. Conflict on the peninsula would be catastrophic. President Trump and I agreed that now is the time to exert the maximum diplomatic and, above all, economic pressure on North Korea to bring this reckless and dangerous regime to its senses. Mr Speaker, the North Korean regime is threatening the peace of the region in a manner that runs the risk of disturbing the world order, putting thousands, millions of lives at risk. It is the most dangerous immediate threat to the stability of our region, and we need more concerted effort by the global community. Now, I've also discussed this threat with President Widodo yesterday of Indonesia, with Prime Minister Abe of Japan, Prime Minister English of New Zealand last week. Everybody, all of the leaders with whom I've discussed this, recognise this threat needs to be addressed. Now, we all recognise that China has the closest and most substantial economic relationship with North Korea. Nobody suggests that China is responsible for North Korea's dangerous conduct. Nobody suggests that North Korea is to China what East Germany was to the old Soviet Union. And we recognise that China is enforcing the latest round of United Nations Security Council sanctions, and we acknowledge that and thank them for doing that. But the reality is that China alone has the economic leverage that would enable them to bring this regime to its senses without conflict. And with the greatest leverage comes the greatest responsibility. So we are thoroughly united in calling on China to do more in concert with the global community. But above all, Mr Speaker, President Trump and I confirmed and affirmed the alliance between our two nations, the bedrock of our security, of our national security. Mr Speaker, we have America's back. America has Australia's back. We are united.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Just on indulgence, I'd
Yes, the Leader of the Opposition.
like
may
to
proceed.
briefly associate the opposition with the Prime Minister's remarks. The message from both sides of this parliament is unequivocal. North Korea's repeated defiance of international law and UN Security Council resolutions is unacceptable. North Korea's ballistic missile and nuclear tests are not only a direct threat to its immediate neighbours, but they undermine global peace and security. No nation can believe itself immune from the threat that this crisis poses. Every nation must do all that it can to pressure North Korea to halt this extremely dangerous conduct. Senator Wong and I will be travelling to Japan and the Republic of Korea later this month. Our message to Australia's friends and partners in the region will be crystal clear. Every member of the Australian Parliament wants a stable, secure and peaceful region, and we will support every practical step that can be taken to reduce the risk of conflict. Whatever Labor can do to assist in this endeavour, we will.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does the claim by the Leader of the House that the Constitution allows a minister to keep their job for 3 months after being disqualified by the High Court reflect government policy?
Member for Sydney, resume her seat. Again, members on my right and someone on the left, I suspect the member for Solomon, are preventing me hearing the question. I'm going to ask the member for Sydney to repeat the question again from the beginning, but I'm giving fair warning now. I'm not going to keep doing this without ejecting people. The member for Sydney has the call.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does the claim by the Leader of the House that the Constitution allows a minister to keep their job for 3 months after being disqualified by the High Court reflect government policy? And is the government making this absurd argument now to ensure that the Deputy Prime Minister has all the benefits of office because he's already campaigning for re-election in New England?
The Prime Minister has the call. He can disregard the last part of the question, which was simply a political assertion.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's interesting to be asked whether the Constitution reflects government policy. I can assure the honourable member that the government is very, very committed to upholding the Australian Constitution, and I hope they are too.
The member for North Sydney. The member for Isaacs is warned.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the minister advise the House how the government is responding to escalating tension on the Korean Peninsula and its potential effect on Australia and the region?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for North Sydney for asking a very important question that is of deep concern to the Australian people. The escalating tensions on the Korean Peninsula are the direct result of the illegal actions of the North Korean regime in threatening its neighbours with ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons. North Korea's behaviour has been roundly condemned by the international community, and Australia joins with the UN Security Council and other nations in urging North Korea to change course. In particular, I advise the House that this morning I joined with the foreign ministers of MICTA, Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey and Australia, in censuring North Korea for its actions. Mr Speaker, Australia's Defence Minister, Senator Marise Payne, is on her way to Seoul. She will meet with Korea's Defence Minister. She will also meet with General Brooks, the Commander of UN Command, US Forces Korea and Combined Forces Command. She will also deliver an address to the Seoul Defence Dialogue, where she will reaffirm Australia's commitment to work with our partners and allies and nations around the world in exerting maximum diplomatic and economic pressure on North Korea to compel it to change its behaviour and deter it from further tests. Mr Speaker, North Korea's destabilising and dangerous behaviour comes at a time of unprecedented levels of engagement by Australia in North Asia. In fact, at any one time, over 200,000 Australians are either living in or visiting South Korea, Japan and China. The Turnbull government is committed to ensuring that all Australians are reliably informed of the current situation on the Korean Peninsula, and we are ensuring that our official travel advice is updated regularly. In fact, this morning the official travel advice on our Smart Traveller website for Japan and for the Republic of Korea was updated, specifically in relation to Korea, noting further provocations by the DPRK or reactions by other countries cannot be ruled out, and that tensions on the Korean Peninsula could escalate with little warning. Mr Speaker, our official advice for the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, DPRK, is that Australians should reconsider their need to travel to the DPRK. I would urge Australians not to travel to North Korea. We have no consular presence there. We have little capacity to assist should any Australians get into trouble. I can inform the House that our embassies in Seoul and Tokyo have comprehensive contingency plans in place should there be any crisis or conflict situation or any consular scenario eventuate. And I can confirm that we have plans in place with our partners and allies should any contingency arise. I urge all Australians to register on the Smart Traveller website, and if you do register, electronic alerts are available. In the meantime, the Australian government will work with nations around the world to explore every avenue to find a peaceful resolution to the crisis on the Korean Peninsula.
The member for Grindler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is addressed to the Minister for Infrastructure. Given the Bolivia Hill upgrade on the New England Highway was funded in the 2013 budget, why did it take until last week for tenders to be called on this vital project? Why has the government only acted now when the project was fully funded more than 4 years ago? Is it because the government and the Deputy Prime Minister are preparing for a snap by-election in New England?
The members on my left, the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Minister, just resume his seat for a second. The Minister for Infrastructure has the call.
You never had anything tendered.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Grayndler for his audition for the leadership of the Labor Party. Now, at least the member for Grayndler, is talking about an issue that people care about in regional Australia. He's talking about an issue that people care about in regional Australia, being investment in land transport infrastructure. Now, we've had all this week those opposite asking questions about issues that people, quite frankly, on work sites around Australia couldn't care less about. They couldn't care less about the questions that the Leader of the Opposition's come up with, but at least the member for Grayndler has raised an issue of significant importance to the people of New England. And I want to thank and congratulate the member from New England for his hard work in advocating on behalf of his community to deliver the infrastructure that he knows will change people's lives and save people's lives in his community. He knows that investment in good infrastructure will change lives and save lives. The way it's changing lives, it's reducing congestion, it's improving productivity, it's creating jobs in regional Australia, particularly in the seat of New England. The seat which has never had better representation than it's getting right now by the Deputy Prime Minister and the Leader of the National Party. And the Bolivia Hill project that the member for Grayndler referred to, will save lives as well. We understand that it's a project that will improve the safety on this important transport link through the New England region. Now, Mr Speaker, can I also add the member for New England has been an extraordinary advocate for infrastructure right across his electorate, and it gives me the opportunity to reflect just for a moment on how hard he worked in delivering the Inland Rail, in delivering record funding for the Inland Rail. Now, the
Minister will resume his seat. The member for Grayndler on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. It goes to relevance. The question went to
why
was it funded in 2013?
Member for Grayndler will resume his seat immediately. The Leader of the House and the Deputy Prime Minister will cease interjecting. The Minister for Infrastructure has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, in relation to the Olivia Hill project, it's important to note that Labor did nothing on that project in the time it was in government. And we're getting on with the job of delivering the better, safer roads in the New England region, which, as I said earlier, will change lives and will save lives. Now, the move in New England, as I said, was fundamentally the driving force with support of colleagues right along the route of the Inland Rail project. We look at the member for Parks, the member for Riverina, member for Groom, the member for Maranoa, all strong advocates for the Melbourne-Brisbane Inland Rail project, which is being delivered by this government. So I do thank the member for Grainler for his question. At least we know one member opposite is actually interested in issues that people in regional Australia care about. They care about better roads. They care about the cost of living. They care about affordable, reliable energy. What they don't care about is this Leader of the Opposition, who they know is very shifty. They know they can't trust him, and they know he's not even interested in their jobs in regional Australia.
Just before I call the member for Indi, I've just been informed that we have two members from the South Australian Parliament with us today. Vicky Chapman, the member for Bragg and the Deputy State Liberal Leader and Shadow Attorney-General, and Mr Stephen Knoll, the member for Schubert and the Shadow Minister for Police Emergency and Correctional Services. On behalf of the House, a warm welcome to you, and I call the member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, but I'd also just begin by saying that people in rural Australia actually also care about regional higher education. And as the Prime Minister knows, that our universities play a pivotal role in economic, social and cultural development. They drive our workforce development, they support our population retention, and they stimulate innovation. And the universities in my electorate, Charles Sturt and La Trobe, together with the Regional Universities Network, have grave concerns about the impact of the government's proposed higher education reform package. They tell me that this package puts at risk their capacity to drive excellence in research and innovation and their ability to deliver quality teaching and learning outcomes. And I share their fears. And I'm asking, Prime Minister, can you commit—
The member for Indi will resume her seat. Unfortunately, there was no question within the 45 seconds, which is the member for Mackellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Can the Treasurer tell the House how today's strong national accounts figures reflect better days ahead for the Australian economy? And what does this mean for the budget?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Mackellar for his question. He knows today's national accounts demonstrate that the better days ahead for our economy are beginning to emerge, and that's good news for all Australians, Mr Speaker. Good news that the entire House should welcome, in fact, Mr Speaker, because in these figures we have seen more growth, with real growth in our economy up 0.8%. In the June quarter. That's more than double the pace of the March quarter. In year average terms, that's 1.9% growth over the course of the year, which is above the forecast for that year, which we had in the budget of this year, coming in ahead of the budget. And of course, the nominal growth in our economy came in on forecast at 6%, Mr Speaker. 6% nominal growth in our economy. There's more investment. New private business investment expanded for the third successive quarter, and at 1.5% growth through the year. That is the first time we've had a positive year since March of 2013. And we're seeing strong business investment in new machinery and equipment, which was up more than 3% in the quarter. Investment across all levels of government was up 5.7% in the quarter, and Mr Speaker, and almost 9% through the year. And there's more to come, because there's $75 billion worth of infrastructure like the projects the minister was just referring to come to our economy. And defence investment is up 26.3% in the quarter, part of our industry plan for defence that is driving jobs and growth in our economy. There's stronger exports. They grew by 2.7% in the June quarter, despite the disruptions and the tragedies of Tropical Cyclone Debbie. And those exports rose 4.3% over the year, and that includes 18.7% in the agriculture exports, Mr Speaker. 18.7%, and service exports, Mr Speaker, have been growing on average by 7% for the past 3 years. And of course stronger industries, with agriculture and services driving growth across the year. But I note for manufacturing in the June quarter, it bounced back with the strongest quarterly growth in manufacturing production in 6 years. So more jobs and wages, as we've already learned. Wages and salaries rose 0.7% in that quarter to go up 2.1% over the year, and that is on the back of the strongest jobs growth we've seen in a fiscal year since the GFC, and the strongest growth in full-time jobs in the last 6 months that we've seen in 40 years, Mr Speaker. This is the product of the economics of opportunity triumphing over the politics of envy, Mr Speaker, which is driven by the Labor Party on that side of the House. And these figures show us that last year's budgeted outcome will be bettered when the final outcome comes out in a few months' time. A stronger budget, more jobs, more growth, more exports, more investment.
The member for Grayndler. Member for Grayndler has a call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Minister for Infrastructure, and I refer the Minister to his joint media release with the Deputy PM of 31 August, which stated the Bolivia Hill upgrade builds on the $10 million I recently confirmed for the future Tenterfield heavy vehicle bypass. Isn't it a fact that the Tenterfield heavy vehicle bypass was funded by the former federal Labor government? Why has it taken the prospect of a snap by-election in New England to panic the government into action on this long overdue project? And is this why he stopped referring to the Turnbull choice government?
The Minister for Infrastructure has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Grayndler for his question. And it's a great day when I get to answer questions on behalf of my great friend, the Leader of the National Party and Deputy Prime Minister, on all the things he's delivering in New England, all the things the Turnbull-Joyce government is delivering in New England. Now, the member for Grayndler likes to refer to projects as being funded by Labor. Now, the problem for member for Grayndler, he doesn't understand a very basic principle. It's actually funded by the Australian taxpayers. The hard work of the Australian taxpayers provide the money for Treasury and Finance, so we make decisions on the priorities on how we're going to spend that money and deliver value for money to the Australian taxpayers. Now, the member for Grayndler says it was funded by Labor, but it wasn't built by Labor. Didn't build it. Didn't build a thing. Bolivia Hill, didn't build it. Tenterfield bypass, didn't build it. Melbourne-Brisbane Inland Rail, didn't build it. Member for Grayndler, didn't build it. Now, remember New England, I don't believe New England's ever had a better representation than it's ever had in this place than the Leader of the National Party and Deputy Prime Minister. He is delivering road and rail infrastructure. He's delivering better bridges through the Bridges Renewal program. He's delivering safer roads through the Road Black Spot program. He's doing more money for schools, mobile phone towers. There's never been a member for New England who's delivered more for his community, and I want to thank the member for Grayndler. For giving me the opportunity to extol the virtues of what a great member he's been and will continue to be for many, many, many more years to come. Now, as those opposite come to the dispatch box this week and talk about citizenship, I tell you now, when you go to the work sites, if you ever go to a work site anymore, but you go to the work sites, the workers are talking about job security, talking about energy affordability and reliability, they're talking about national security. None of them are talking about dual citizenship. So I'd suggest to those opposite, get off the comfy green benches over there, get out there to some of those work sites and listen to what real workers are talking about. They're talking about the jobs being provided through the Turnbull-Joyce government's Jobs and Infrastructure program, delivering right around regional Australia. They're talking about energy affordability. They're talking about the cost of living. And I'd suggest those opposite get out there and understand the issues that Australians are actually interested in.
The member for Swan.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Revenue and Financial Services. Will the Minister update the House how the government's economic plan is delivering a strong economy as reflected in today's national accounts? How do businesses and families benefit from a strong economy, including those in my electorate of Swan? Thank you.
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Swan for this very important question, because he understands and his community understands how important it is to have a strong and growing economy and how delivering the right framework deliver higher wages for those people. The member for Swan understands that a growing economy does mean higher wages, better wages and more jobs. And today's national accounts shows that the Australian economy grew by 0.8% in the June quarter. It is more than double what we saw in the March quarter, and there has been significant growth across many sectors, including the manufacturing, construction and agricultural sectors, all of which is very good news for businesses, workers and households in our economy. Today, this, of course, very strong result comes off the back of strong jobs growth last financial year, which saw around about 240,000 jobs created across Australia. And it's on top of the very good news about the wages growth announced on Monday, which saw a 1.2% increase in total wages paid in the June quarter. Our government knows that despite 26 years of uninterrupted economic growth, you cannot rest on your laurels. You need to put in place the right economic settings, and we have been doing that. Our very strong enterprise tax plan is delivering. It has delivered already very significant tax cuts to small and medium-sized enterprises across Australia, and that's around about 18,000 businesses in the electorate of Swan. But those opposite would put a handbrake on our economy, and they would punish those small and medium-sized enterprises. They would punish them by increasing their taxes. In fact, they have got a massive tax grab ahead of those small and medium-sized enterprises, because they would jack up their corporate tax rate to 30% if they have a turnover between $2 million and $25 million. This is, of course, not in the best interests of those small businesses and the millions of Australians that are employed by them. Now, Labor used to believe in actually cutting taxes. They used to believe in that. In fact, even the Leader of the Opposition used to talk about it. He used to talk about it in this place and beyond. He used to say that cutting the company income tax rate increases domestic productivity and domestic investment. More capital means higher productivity and economic growth and leads to more jobs and higher wages. Unfortunately, though, the Labor Party now is focused on the politics of envy rather than the economics of opportunity. They would punish small business people, they would punish their workers. They are only interested in the politics, not in the right economic policies.
The member for Grayndler. The Deputy Prime Minister and the Leader of the House, I am not going to mention them again for interjecting without there being action. Don't even finish the word. The member for Grayndler has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is addressed to the Minister for Infrastructure. Given that the Minister has responsibility for infrastructure, why is it that it was the member for New England who issued a media release announcing the government this month had called for tenders to build the Scone bypass, and not the Minister for Infrastructure? Given this project was funded in the 2013 budget, why has it taken the prospect of a snap by-election in New England to panic this government into action on this vital project for a member for New England who's admitted—
You're a bit rusty, Albo. You're a bit rusty.
The Minister for Infrastructure.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Grayndler. It's actually my birthday next Wednesday. It's very kind of him to give me 3 questions a week early. As the member for Grayndler would understand, if you had a look at the Turnbull-Joyce government's $75 billion infrastructure investment program, he'd understand that there are so many projects around Australia, I couldn't possibly get out to announce every one of them. I need to rely on my good friend, the Leader of the Nationals, and and Deputy Prime Minister to make the announcement in his own electorate. Because last week, Mr Speaker, I had the opportunity to travel to the Pacific Highway, and I met with the member for Page announcing another 400 new jobs in his electorate. Then I travelled, I think, to the member for Capricornia's seat and the member for Flynn's seat, and we were looking at the massive upgrades to the Bruce Highway project, Mr Speaker. Right across Australia, this government is delivering the roads, the bridges, the train lines, the seaports, the airports. We're delivering the infrastructure that will actually make a difference in people's lives. And the member for New England is doing an extraordinary job in delivering for his constituents, because he understands when you build good infrastructure, you will change people's lives and you'll save people's lives. Changing lives by creating new jobs in his community, whether it be in Scone or in Tenterfield, or those who will benefit from the Bolivia Hill project. Now, it will also save lives because, Mr Speaker, as you're aware, in regional Australia, the road toll is something that we are very concerned about, and investing in better, safer roads, investing in good infrastructure will actually reduce road trauma in regional communities, including in New England.
The Minister will resume his seat for a second. The member for Grayndler on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker, and it goes to relevance. The question went to why nothing for 4 years.
The member for Grayndler will resume his seat. He won't. Member for Grayndler will resume his seat. The Minister for Infrastructure has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the member for Grayndler likes to pretend that he built everything. I think he pretended at one stage he was responsible for the Sphinx. But
the Minister will put that prop down and he'll resume his seat for a second. Just resume his seat for a second. Members on my right. Members on my right, cease interjecting. The member for Hunter can wait as well. I know there's a bit of a traffic jam there, but I just want to address the issue of props. Members, if you can have your attention for a second, please. The Minister resumed his seat. I'm making it very clear I'm going to have a much lower tolerance for props from now on, not just in question time, but throughout all of the parliamentary proceedings. If members want to familiarise themselves with the practice, I'd advise them to do so. There are occasions where props are tolerated to illustrate in a factual way answers, but it's very limited in question time and through debate. And I'm giving forewarning for those who flout that ruling. They'll simply just lose the call. Now, the member for Grayndler seeking to table the document.
Yes, I am, Mr Speaker. A media release from Barnaby Joyce, tenders called to build the Scone bypass.
Seeking leave?
I am seeking leave. It's not on the department's website.
Leave granted. Leave's not granted.
It's not on the website.
No, that's it. OK. The member for Menzies.
The Minister for Defence Industry, would he update the House on the government's National Defence Industry project that guarantees the future security of the nation and supports our economic prosperity? And indeed, would he compare that with any other approaches?
The Minister for Defence Industry has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Menzies for his question. And I can tell him and the House, of course, that the government is committed to a $200 billion build-up of our military capability over the next 10 years, the largest build-up of our military capability in our peacetime history, being delivered by this government over the next 10 years. But unlike previous Labor governments, who didn't commit to one vessel being built in this country in 6 years, we are committed to spending as much of that money, as much of that build-up as possible in Australia, driving jobs and investment here in this country. And it's working, Mr Speaker. As the National Accounts showed today, as the Treasurer said earlier, in the National Accounts, defence investment is up 26.3% in the June quarter, Mr Speaker. 26.3%. So the government's policies of driving jobs and investment by using that enormous defence heft to drive jobs, investment and capability is working. The Joint Strike Fighter is a very, very good example. It won't just give us the most lethal, the most lethal and potent and effective platform in the air in the world today. We're also using it in two ways to drive jobs and investment. As part of the global supply chain, we've already had over 30 businesses sharing in $800 million worth of value here in Australia, and that's growing to $2.5 billion by 2021, Mr Speaker. Businesses like Morand in Moorabbin, Quickstep in Bankstown, Chemring in Lara, Lovitz in Montmorency, Ferrer Engineering in Brisbane, BAE in Newcastle, TAE in Newcastle and Brisbane, GE Australia in Brisbane, RUAG in Adelaide and Melbourne, and Northrop Grumman in Newcastle are all sharing as part of the global supply chain in this enormous build-up of our defence industry capability here in this country. But we've also won the right to be the Asia-Pacific hub for the maintenance and sustainment of the Joint Strike Fighters that are operating in our region in the Asia-Pacific, for frames, for engines, for warehousing most recently, and for 64 out of 65 of the components that have already been decided by the Joint Project Office. So we are creating jobs, thousands of jobs throughout this supply chain and investment across our economy. More good news in what is a burgeoning economy, in stark contrast to the cold, winter-like years of the Labor government in defence, where defence spending dropped to 1.56% of GDP, the lowest since appeasement, the lowest since 1938. They should have been ashamed of themselves, Mr Speaker, for the way they left defence. This government, firstly the Abbott government and now the Turnbull government, are fixing it.
I inform the House that we have present on the floor of the Parliament this afternoon a parliamentary delegation led by Mr Arlene, Speaker of the Parliament of Sweden. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you. The member for Hunter.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister is so confident about the outcome in the High Court, why has the Deputy Prime Minister already started campaigning for a New England by-election? And if he knows he's gone, who does the Prime Minister think he's kidding?
I don't believe that question's in order. I'll go to the next question. The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Energy. Will the Minister update the House on action that the government is taking to ensure there is enough baseload dispatchable power to deliver an affordable and reliable energy supply to Australian families and businesses, including in my electorate of Robertson? Is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for her question. I know she's a hard-working member who's deeply concerned about rising power prices and the impact on her constituents. And she, like all of the members on this side of the House, understand we are doing everything possible to ensure sufficient dispatchable baseload power in the system, like the export mechanism that were put in place to restrict gas exports and ensure that there is more sufficient domestic supply, the investment in Snowy 2.0 and other storage projects, Mr Speaker, our support for the Finkel recommendation that large-scale generators give a minimum 3 years notice of closure and that wind and solar farms provide their own levels of backup. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked am I aware of any alternative approaches. Well, we know the Leader of the Opposition was not the people's choice. It was not the people's choice. Well, now we know he's not the workers' choice. He's not the workers' choice, because the Labor Party, led by the Leader of the Opposition, wants to close down Australia's coal-fired power stations. It's in your election platform. It's in the motions that you joined with the Greens. And it's in your reckless 45% emissions reduction target, Mr Speaker. And after the experiences of Labor governments in South Australia and Victoria, which oversaw the closure of Northern and Hazelwood, we've seen the higher prices and the less stable system that flows from closing coal-fired power stations. But you don't hear the member for Hunter speak out for the workers in his electorate. He waves the white flag. He waves the white flag. He's not interested in the workers in Liddell. You don't hear from the member for Shortland, about those workers of Vales Point. You don't hear from the member for Patterson.
The Minister will resume his seat. The Minister will resume his seat. The members for Shortland and Brand, amongst others, are interjecting again far too often and far too loud. I'm giving fair warning now. The Minister for the Environment and Energy has the call.
Mr Speaker, isn't it ironic that the Labor members are now finding their voice when they had nothing to say when Labor Party announced their policy to close the coal-fired power stations?
Member for Shortland will leave under 94A.
Has said nothing
the member for
about
Shortland,
Vales Point.
Minister resume his seat. The member for Shortland has been asked to leave under 94A twice, and he can't hear because he's shouting at the chamber. The Minister has the call.
As my learned colleague said here, the members and the constituents and the members' electorate will be better represented now that he's left the chamber, Mr Speaker. Now that he's left this chamber, because the member for Hunter has been nowhere to be seen. The member for Shortland been nowhere to be seen. The member for Patterson has been nowhere to be seen. And the Leader of the Opposition has failed to be upfront with the Australian people how his plans to close coal-fired power stations will cost jobs, cost investment, cost growth, see higher electricity prices and a less stable system. That's Labor's energy policy.
The member for Patterson is warned. The Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday the Prime Minister claimed the government had only referred the Deputy Prime Minister, and I quote, to give the High Court the opportunity to clarify the law. Given at that stage the High Court had already been given the opportunity to clarify the law with Senator Canavan's referral, why was it necessary to also refer the Deputy Prime Minister? Isn't it the case that the Solicitor General's advice is not as strong as the government is claiming?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, you ruled a moment ago that the member for Hunter's question was out of order, and I do not dispute your ruling, Mr Speaker, but I was hoping it might have been about energy. I was hoping it might have been about energy prices and the fact that the Labor Party is doing everything it can to put the security and the affordability of Australian
The
energy
Prime Minister
at risk.
resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I know the ruling about the preamble, but given that's often all we get, I'm asking for direct relevance to be enforced.
Well, I just asked the Manager of Opposition Business to resume his seat and for those interjecting behind him to cease interjecting so I can rule on the matter. I do allow preambles, that's correct, but the question I say to the Prime Minister was very specific on the matter of the High Court, so if he needs to confine himself to that.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the honourable member has asked me this question in one form or another on numerous occasions, and I refer him to my earlier answers and cannot help but regret that today the opposition has no questions on national security, no questions on the economy, no questions on energy.
The member for Capricornia.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Agriculture, Water Resources and Northern Australia. Will the Deputy Prime Minister outline to the House how the government is committed to the long-term development of our resources sector and the economic prosperity of regional Australia? Is he aware of any threats to existing and future jobs in regional Australia?
The Deputy Prime Minister. Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the honourable member for his question, and the Labor Party has got
the
nothing
Deputy
to
Prime
say
Minister
but
will
pile
resume
again.
his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, I move that he be no longer heard.
The Manager of Opposition Business has moved the Deputy Prime Minister be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the noes have it. Division required to ring the bells for 4 minutes. Lock the doors. The question is that the Deputy Prime Minister be no further heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. What the honourable members for Morton and Lawler tell us for the ayes, and the honourable members for Gray and Murray tell us for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 67, noes 73. The question is therefore negatived. If members can resume their seats as quickly as possible. As I said, if members can resume their seats, we'll come back to question time. I just want to make a statement to the House before the Deputy Prime Minister resumes his answer. There's been a number of occasions now where the Manager of Opposition Business has moved that the Deputy Prime Minister be no further heard, and he's done that under Standing Order 80, and as members will know, I'm required to put that motion immediately without debate, which we've done on each occasion. I've also made clear, I think, on the first occasion when there was a dispute about the clock, which I think we've got past, that no, members on my right, that obviously if this continued, potentially the Leader of the House could move every time the Leader of the Opposition asked a question. He'd be no further heard. And question time is designed for openness and accountability. It's a central feature of the day where ministers are questioned, and I'm now going to refer members to Standing Order 78, which does say, should any of these questions be negative, which they have and have today, no similar proposal shall be received if the Speaker is of the opinion that it's an abuse of the orders or forms of the House or is moved for the purpose of obstructing business. So I'm ruling now I would be not accepting any further motions this week. The Deputy Prime Minister can resume his answer.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. And isn't it amazing? It's a disgrace.
The Deputy Prime Minister resume his seat. Members on my left, the Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, I move that so much of the standing and sessional orders be suspended as would prevent the Manager of Opposition
Business will resume his seat. I'm not going to accept it in the middle of an answer. I always accept it at the end of an answer and with the call alternating. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the honourable member for his question, because the honourable member would understand what a great outcome it has been for Australian resources. To note that in our Australian resources, especially in our agricultural resources, that the percentage point contribution to year-on-year GDP growth of 1.8%, the largest was agriculture. Agriculture has been the standout industry. In fact, under this government, we have completely turned around the agricultural outcome of our nation. And that is providing jobs in Rockhampton, it's providing jobs in the Fitzroy Basin, it's supporting the jobs of the meat workers. And it's a shame that some would see it as an opportunity to walk away or walk out. But it's also very important to the member for Rockhampton for what we're doing in the mining industry. We stand behind the mining industry. We stand behind the coal industry. We believe in labourers. We believe in people who work for a living. And this is vitally important because we've seen today a clear example of where the Labor Party resides resides as far as coal workers, as far as the coal industry goes. The member for Hunter was first elbowed out of the way, then he was ruled out, and then the member for Shortland was thrown out. They do not believe in supporting the industry of Australia. They do not believe in the power industry. They do not come in here and stand up for labourers in this country. They do not stand up for the industry of this nation. They do not have the ticker anymore to stand behind what used to be their constituency. The member for Townsville does not stand behind the coal workers. The member for Shortland will not stand up for coal workers. The member for Hunter will not stand up for coal workers. They've thrown the towel in for coal workers. The member for Newcastle has refused to go into bat for coal workers. They refuse to stand by it. And what we've seen now is what's going to happen to power. Under their policy, we will see the fiasco of South Australia becoming the fiasco of Melbourne, becoming the fiasco of Sydney. We will see under their power policy that the people will be stuck in the lifts. We will see under their power policy that those traffic lights will stop. They will take our nation's economy to oblivion because of their desire to chase every vote in Balmain, to chase every vote in Annandale, and to never stand up for the people of Cessnock, never stand up for the people of Townsville, never stand up for the people of Rockhampton. This is a Labor Party that is bereft, completely bereft of any belief that they once upon a time had in the labourers of Australia.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. I move that so much of the standing and sessional orders be suspended, as would prevent the Manager of Opposition Business from moving the following motion immediately. The House calls on the Deputy Prime Minister to stand aside from Cabinet until doubts about his constitutional qualifications have been resolved. Even the Prime Minister wasn't listening to a word of that answer. Even the Prime Minister was turning his back on the Deputy Prime Minister. And when you're in a situation where you're off campaigning in your electorate, where you're already campaigning in the by-election, when the Prime Minister himself is turning his back on you when you're giving an answer, it's time to acknowledge it's time to go. It's time to stand aside. It's time for this deputy to realise it's no small matter when the Constitution says you probably shouldn't be here. And if the argument from the government is what we heard yesterday and today from the Prime Minister of Australia, that the only reason they've referred it to the High Court is to give the High Court an opportunity to make a decision. Well, hang on. We'd already referred the section to the High Court for Senator Canavan. They were already going to have an opportunity to rule on this issue. So if they were already going to have that opportunity, why did we refer the Deputy Prime Minister to the High Court? And there's one reason and one reason only. That's Solicitor General's advice. There's a reason why they won't let anyone see it. It is not the ironclad, nowhere-to-go advice that the Prime Minister wants us to believe it is. But he does know that everything for the legitimacy of this government hangs on that advice being as strong as he wants us to believe. So the only option the Prime Minister has is to tell everybody it's unbelievably strong, but I'm going to keep it a secret. And when we say, well, why is it that we had to refer the deputy there in the first place, and he says, oh, it was to give them an opportunity, they already had that. They already had that as a result of Senator Canavan. They were going to rule on the same section of the Constitution. We have a Prime Minister who will say anything and do anything to cling to office. And he is willing, and the reason we should deal with this motion immediately is because the Prime Minister is willing to misrepresent advice from the Solicitor General in order to make sure he can get away with the crisis behind whether or not this government has a majority. And if the Prime Minister thinks that me saying, oh, these documents that you've got aren't as good as you say, if he thinks that's an unreasonable argument for me to run, well, let's click back to Monday. Because on Monday he said exactly that about documents in the possession of the Leader of the Opposition. On Monday he said exactly what I've just said. Those documents aren't as strong as you're claiming they are, and if you've got the courage of your convictions, you'll stand up and show the documents. And what happened straight after question time, after the Prime Minister had said that?
the Leader of the Opposition said, OK, if the conspiracy theories of the internet trolls are now going to be run by the Prime Minister of Australia, here are the documents. And I say to the Prime Minister, unless the advice from the Solicitor General is a complete con, unless the Prime Minister is completely misrepresenting the advice that he has, when he stands up in a moment, provide us with the advice. Show the courage of conviction that the Leader of the Opposition showed. Show that you're willing to stand by the claims that you
Members
made.
on my right.
Because the Leader of the Opposition was able to sit here with documents in his hand that the Prime Minister said, well, show us the documents, and we did. Prime Minister, it's not simply the Prime Minister's reputation which hangs on the strength of that advice. The entire legitimacy of this government hangs on the strength of that advice. This is a government that claims to have a majority of one and has become the first government in the history of Australia that has gone to the High Court to ask whether or not it's true that they in fact have a lawful majority. First time that has ever happened in the history of our country. But what do they think's not a problem? They think it's not a problem to have a doubt over every decision made on regional development, regional communications, local government, resources, territories, agriculture, water resources and Northern Australia. And as of Friday, every decision that would otherwise be taken by the Prime Minister of Australia, they're willing to have under a constitutional doubt. They're willing to have under a constitutional cloud. We accept and we agree with every issue that has been made about national security. Why on earth in that environment is the Prime Minister about to put somebody who we have unanimously said we don't know if they're legally there in charge of every decision this nation takes while the Prime Minister's away? How on earth can there be any level of responsibility from those opposite and from that Prime Minister if they're willing to take that sort of risk? But if he won't do it, if he won't make that sort of decision as a matter of principle, if he won't make that sort of decision as a matter of precaution, if he won't even make that sort of decision as a matter of consistency, can I just suggest to the Prime Minister, do it as a matter of self-defence? Because if you date back to the moment the Deputy Prime Minister first stood there and told us about his New Zealander citizenship, since that moment the government's become increasingly wacky. Since that moment, this government has lurched from one conspiracy theory to the next conspiracy theory. I don't know what was unleashed in the minds of those opposite from the moment we heard about the New Zealand citizenship of the Deputy Prime Minister. But from that moment, we heard about the New Zealand conspiracy, the Cuban conspiracy, East Germany, the Berlin Wall. We heard from them about socialism, communism, Stalinism, and then the great United Kingdom secret agent leader of the opposition conspiracy. Those opposite have gone into the most ridiculous spiral of self-satire since the moment that the Deputy Prime Minister let it be known that he was a citizen of another country. Now, what's behind all of this is that document that the Prime Minister claims that he's very familiar with. This is the document called the Australian Constitution. It's no small matter as to whether or not the Constitution is kept to. And there are plenty of times that governments will get advice from the Solicitor General, and when they get the advice they say, yep, we're confident of what we're doing. But when you get the strongest advice, that's not when you say, but we'd better go check with the High Court. That's not the moment when you go to check with the High Court. You go to check to the High Court for one reason and one reason only, and that's that after reading the advice, the Prime Minister thought, we don't know whether the Deputy is legally here. He looked at the advice and thought, we don't know whether we actually have 75 members of this parliament voting with the government. We don't know. Because when advice is strong, And there's lots of times when governments of both sides get advice that's strong and they stand at the dispatch box and they say, no, 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 others might challenge this in court, but we are confident of our position. But this time they got the advice and said, we'd better go straight to the High Court. We'd better go straight to the High Court. And that is why Labor continues and will continue to pursue this issue, because it goes to whether or not this government is lawfully in office. It has gone to real-life outcomes on penalty rates, real-life outcomes in terms of who's in charge of the banks, real-life outcomes. But here's the thing, it also has resulted in a real-life outcome for whether or not he gets that job. And every other principle will go to one side when that is jeopardised. We've seen this Prime Minister be willing to compromise every previous stated view that he claimed to be passionate about something on the basis that this is just what you have to do to maintain a majority. Well, being in a situation where, for the first time in the history of this parliament, there is a doubt as to the constitutionality of the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. Prime Minister, stand him aside. Stand him aside. If you had any courage, if you had any authority, you would have done it more than a fortnight ago.
Is the motion seconded? The member for Hunter.
Yes, Mr Speaker, I second the motion. The pork barrelling in New England, Mr Speaker, has cranked up a notch or two. From the Hunter electorate you can smell the pork, Mr Speaker. And this is the question, Mr Speaker. If the Prime Minister is so confident about the decision in the High Court, why is the Deputy Prime Minister currently already campaigning for a New England by-election? Now, the other great thing about representing the Hunter electorate, Mr Speaker, the neighbouring electorate to the member for New England, is that people talk. People talk to the member in the neighbouring electorate. And what they are telling me, Mr Speaker, is that suddenly they're seeing the member for New England. For the first time in 3 years, the member for New England is turning up. In fact, he's going to the opening of an envelope, Mr Speaker. After years of doing nothing, he's ramping up the campaign in New England. And why is he ramping up the campaign in New England? Because, like the Prime Minister, he knows that his chances of running the gauntlet in the High Court are very poor indeed. And the reason the Prime Minister will not table the Solicitor General's advice is that he knows it's not as strong as he's making out it is, Mr Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister should stand aside. What do we know about this case? We know he was a New Zealand citizen, Mr Speaker. We know he was a dual citizen. We know what Section 44 says. We know that the Prime Minister himself doesn't believe he can win the High Court case. We know the Canavan case, Senator Canavan's case, already was providing the Prime Minister with the guidance he needed to determine the fate of Section 44, but all he was concerned about is the fate of the Deputy Prime Minister. Why? Well, we know why. Because unlike Senator Canavan, the Deputy Prime Minister sits in this place, a place where this Prime Minister desperately needs every vote he can muster, as we saw earlier in the week, Mr Speaker, where he relied on the vote of the Deputy Prime Minister to survive a vote in this place. So we know why the Prime Minister is misleading or should I say embellishing on the Solicitor General's advice. We understand why he's clinging like death to the Deputy Prime Minister, because his whole Prime Ministership rests on it. What we don't know, Mr Speaker, is why the Deputy Prime Minister is hanging on. Well, I think we know the answer to that question in part because we know that when he travelled to Canberra to share the bad news with the Prime Minister, he came down here with every intention of resigning and going to a by-election in New England, but the Prime Minister said, oh no, there won't be any of that. There won't be any of that because I need your vote in the House of Representatives to survive. You are not going anywhere, and I don't care how embarrassed you are. I don't care how embarrassed you are.
Hunter will refer to members by their correct titles.
I'm going to give him some due here. I know the Deputy Prime Minister is embarrassed to be sitting in question time every day so illegitimately. He's embarrassed to be here. But this Prime Minister leaves him with no choice, Mr Speaker. Now, the arrogance of all this is that the Prime Minister wants us to believe that we're better off having a minister who sits with a big black cloud over his head than someone else in that position. This is the height of arrogance, Mr Speaker. This minister is not indispensable. Far from it. I can name plenty of his colleagues around the benches there who would do a far better job. For their own future career prospects, I'll choose not to name them. But that's not about it's not about the ability of this Deputy Prime Minister. It's all about the capacity of this man sitting opposite to hang on to his job. He wants us to believe that a guy with a big black cloud hanging over his head, with a poor record in any case, an agriculture minister who's done nothing for the agriculture sector in 4 years, he believes he's better off in that job with that big black cloud hanging over his head than any one of these sitting around the benches. Well, I know, Mr Speaker, they're starting to ask questions about that. They're starting to ask questions as to why this bloke gets to stick around despite his poor performance over 4 years and despite the fact that he's probably in breach of Section 44 of the Constitution. So the rumblings have begun, Mr Speaker. The rumblings have begun in earnest. But one thing is clear. The Deputy Prime Minister knows he's going to a by-election. That's why they're on the campaign trail. That's why they're booking their campaign officers. That's why the leaflets are already being handed out. And this Prime Minister should stand.
Member for Hunter's time has concluded. The question is that the motion moved. Prime Minister resume his seat. Prime Minister resume his seat. Members on my left. It's completely disorderly behaviour. I'm trying to state the question. I wouldn't have thought those sitting behind the Manager of Opposition Business would want me to delay stating the question so the debate can proceed. The question is that the motion moved by the Manager of Opposition Business be agreed to. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the House has urgent matters to discuss. Energy prices, jobs. We've just heard from the member for Hunter, who claims, apparently, that Section 44 is the leading topic of conversation in his electorate. I tell you what, Mr Speaker, I know what the topic is. The topic is why he has abandoned the workers at Liddell, why he's abandoned the workers at Tomago, why he's abandoned the workers who elected him. Why this old boy of Cessnock High School, whose magazine is called The Black Diamond, has suddenly become No Coal Joel. That's what he's up to.
The Prime Minister will refer to members by their correct titles.
Mr Speaker, we have had in the last 2 days very, very grave reports from the Australian energy market operator demonstrating that we face a grave shortage of dispatchable energy in the near term and over the medium term. And that is putting jobs at risk, it's putting households under pressure. It is what happens when you have years of mistaken Labor energy policy.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat for a second. The members for Rankin, Ballarat and Brand will leave under 94A. Member for Ballarat will leave immediately or she'll be named. Prime Minister has the call.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, what we've been told by the Australian energy market operator is that there will be the likelihood of a shortfall incident is between 39% and 43% in Victoria and 26% and 33% in South Australia. And that is a consequence of dispatchable power being driven out of the market by renewable energy. Now, renewable energy is becoming more available and it's becoming cheaper. And we are undertaking the largest renewable energy project built in Australia since the first snowy scheme. So we don't make any challenge to renewable energy. But, Mr Speaker, one of the things the Labor Party has forgotten is that the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. And so, in their mindless incompetence, in their reckless idiocy, they have proceeded down the track of putting more and more variable renewables into the energy mix and providing no backup, no storage. And what about gas as a firming power? That'd be good, you could use gas. But oh no, another great achievement of the Labor Party. They allowed gas to be exported from the east coast of Australia, and despite many warnings, failed to do anything to protect the domestic market. Now, to be fair, Mr Speaker, the member for Port Adelaide has made a confession, and better late than never. I think we all agree with that. We all agree with that. But, Mr Speaker, it was rather late in coming, because when he was on Insiders on the 30th of April, he was asked. He was asked by Barry Cassidy. He said, "You got plenty of advice when you were in government that the surge in exports would lead to these sorts of problems. You didn't take this action." No, said the member for Port Adelaide, we didn't get that advice. That was very, very bad, Mr Speaker, because the Labor Party government's own energy white paper said these transitional pressures will manifest in tighter supply and higher prices. And as if that wasn't enough, the AEMO's gas statement of opportunities in the same year said this will result in supply shortfalls. Exactly what happened. So finally, Mr Speaker, finally it all caught up with him, and he had to confess to David Spears. Not a man of the cloth, not able to give absolution any more than his constituents or Australians will give the Labor Party absolution for their chronic failure in energy policy. Again and again, ideology and idiocy. Why are gas prices so high? Because Labor allowed gas to be exported and didn't protect the domestic market. That's a fact. That's a fact. Who's addressing it? We're addressing it. That's the matter we should be discussing today. That's really urgent. Energy prices are an urgent matter right now. That's what Australian families are talking about. That's what's putting Australian businesses and jobs at risk. And then we've been told, Mr Speaker, that there will be in 2022, it's estimated by AEMO, a 1,000 megawatt shortfall in dispatchable energy in the national electricity market. That is a very big gap. That puts at risk jobs, businesses, families. It creates a huge vulnerability of blackouts. Now, this is the big difference. We are for affordable and reliable energy. Labor is for blackouts. Labor is for energy shortages. Labor is for the type of outcomes the member for Port Adelaide has got used to in South Australia. Well, he clearly loves being in the dark. He calls, that's right, Mr Speaker, he called it a hiccup. When those hospitals had energy cut off, he called it a hiccup. That's all it was. Now, Mr Speaker, one of the obvious opportunities to cover that 1,000 megawatt gap is to get more life out of existing coal-fired power stations. And Liddell, obviously, is an opportunity to run for longer, to run past 2022. Now, you would think, Mr Speaker, that this obvious opportunity, which has been flagged as a good avenue to go down by Alan Finkel himself, it's been flagged by AEMO as a prudent approach. It's perfectly obvious that the cheapest coal-fired power is that from existing power stations. So you'd think you would get some support for that, particularly from the member for Hunter. But this is what he said. He said, not one energy company has shown any interest in the Prime Minister's thought bubble. Well, sadly, that turns out to be very quickly out of date. He has denied any opportunity to provide continued employment for the workers at Liddell or indeed for the workers at Tomago. And No, the honourable member can't dig his way out of that. You're very deep in the pit, member for Hunter, right down at the bottom, and there's risk of a cave-in if you go any further, I can tell you. You're in very deep waters here, Mr. Speaker. This member for Hunter is portraying every member of his electorate who depends on energy, who depends on manufacturing. The Labor Party has walked away from energy security. They've walked away from any attempt to defend the jobs, the occupations of those so many workers that they claim to represent. And you've got the leader of the opposition's union, the Australian Workers' Union, lots of miners. Leader of the opposition used to represent a lot of miners. He did. He represented them. And then he gave $100,000 of their dues to Get Up. And what did Get Up use the $100,000 for? For a campaign to close down the industries that employed his members. So what that tells you, Mr. Speaker, is that the Leader of the Opposition, like all of these union bosses, is utterly disconnected from the members they represent. Now, these are the issues that we should be discussing. We should be focused today on energy policy, as we have been throughout this question time. And what we've had from the opposition instead is these big threats of creating chaos and mayhem in the parliament. An absolutely swingeing question time strategy. We felt battered by it over here, Mr. Speaker. It was like being flogged with a wet lettuce, Mr. Speaker. The reality is the Labor Party has failed Australians on energy. And now, when we see the result, when the facts are laid out by AEMO, the Labor Party is not even prepared to discuss it. Those are the issues we should be discussing. That's why this motion should be rejected. We have urgent matters of energy security to deal with in this House. That's what we should be addressing today. The jobs, the businesses, the households of Australia. We can discuss that today. The Labor Party should focus on the real concerns of the people they claim but so dismally represent.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded, and the time allotted for this debate has concluded. The question is that the motion moved by the Manager of Opposition Business be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the noes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. lock the doors. Question is that the motion moved by the Manager of Opposition Business be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Lawler and Morton tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Murray and Gray tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 66, noes 73. The question is therefore negatived. The Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I thank the Prime Minister.